I'm Lisa Dolly. I'm the Executive Director of the Jacobs Institute for Innovation and Education at the University of San Diego. And we're going to get going with our session on your online design toolkit. Oh, and I do want to mention, thank you, Monty, that we have two other people here from the Jacobs Institute, Monty Kalish, who is our Technology Director, and Priscilla Falter, who handles our business and operations. Hi there. And welcome. Yeah. We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm just going to put this out there. Let's get in the context of why are we even talking about an online design toolkit? Everything, we live in a world where everything is designed. Everything, from your technology to your food. The whole food system is designed, right? To architecture, to cities, to if we work in education, the educational materials we use, the classroom is designed, everything is designed. So let's start there. As we're thinking about design, we know from research that effective designs can promote emotions and really positive experiences. We can even design for joy. And I mentioned this in my webinar 2 weeks ago. Ingrid Fattel does an amazing TED Talk on designing for joy, where her research shows 4 elements, and they're illustrated here. One is circles are more friendly and joyful than sharp, angular designs. And so you see the photo on the upper left. I took that. We were going to Disneyland for the day, and I thought, man, even in the parking lot, they're starting with designing for joy. They could have just left the walls blank, but instead they put these bright pops of color, circles, and you instantly feel uplifted, right? So Ingrid talks about bright pops of color create joy, circles create joy, symmetry creates joy. So when things seem balanced, we feel harmonious, we feel like everything's okay. And repetition. And the reason it's really interesting, the psychology, like this little picture right here of these little lanterns repeating in a pattern creates joy. Like if we just saw 1 or 2, we might not feel as joyful. And the repetition is really primal. When there's multiples of something, it's not scarce anymore. Think back in our hunter-gatherer days where there's only 1 or 2. And there's scarcity, and you're worried and fearful, and you've got to get some, right? So when we see multiples, it creates comfort and joy. And the same with bright pops of color, repetition, and harmony. So just some 4 basic design principles, and thinking about why settle for things that aren't joyful, or why settle for designs that don't engage in education. We can purposely design in a better direction. So this isn't teaching, it's not teaching strategies, but it's actually building materials and how we design that content. And going back to Bloom's taxonomy, creating at the very top is a higher order thinking skill. Whether you're designing or whether your students are designing, learning these skills, I think engage you as a teacher or a designer, or a faculty member, and they can be engaging for your students. And one of the phenomenons that we see when people go online or start learning online and teaching online is that they tend to begin creating more. They create more digital assets. And so as you begin creating, and whether that's a PowerPoint or a book cover for some PDF file that you made, or a PDF cover, or video, maybe you're producing video, that there are principles of design that can help us create stronger work. So let's go through what some of those are today. Oh, so in the online content design toolkit, I'm definitely going to spend time talking about CARP, the 4 graphic or visual design principles. I should say visual there. Some people refer to them as CRAP, but if you do a Google search for those, they're all over the place. It's a very industry standard 4 basic principles of visual design. So we're going to get into that in detail. And depending on your interest and how much time we have, I'm going to talk about copyright-free assets. People are like, am I going to violate copyright if I take a photo off the internet? Probably. So why don't we look for copyright-free sound clips, video clips, photos? Where do you find those things? Icons. And then I'll share with you some of my favorite content creation tools. There are very friendly tools. You don't have to know the Adobe Creative Suite, right? Don't have to go out and learn Illustrator, which is a professional tool. There are some very friendly user tools that we can use too. So let's get started with CARP. I'm going to disclose most of this is adapted from Robin Williams wrote a book years ago called The Non-Designer's Design Book that goes over the 4 CARP design principles. It's a great small book, really easy to digest. If you're brand new to visual design, I would suggest getting that book. And these graphics, most of these come from here. Okay, so introducing the 4 design principles, and just in chat, can you let me know, have you ever heard or used the CARP or CRAP design principles? Yes or no? If you wouldn't mind just sharing. No, yay, okay, Mary, yes. So it's maybe some new skills for people. So we're gonna get into 4 things, and I promise you, after I go through this, you will never look at design the same. If you just think in your mind, CRAP or CARP, we're gonna look at contrast, how that makes a difference. We're gonna look at alignment. We're gonna look at repetition of elements in the design, and proximity, how things are close or far apart. And I'm also gonna talk a little bit about font, using fonts. These are just 2 posters, movie posters. They're very iconic. I thought they really illustrated all 4 of these elements beautifully: contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. So let's get into each one of those. So contrast is a really simple concept that elements that aren't the same should be very different so they stand out. If you make them slightly different, light blue, dark blue, it confuses the user. They see a relationship that they think should exist, but it doesn't really exist. I think this iPod or Apple picture on the iPod is a great example of contrast. In contrast, often you're looking at foreground and background, and you want that really strong. The strongest contrast you can have is black and white. And it doesn't matter if you have black background and white text, or white text and vice versa. But creating this strong contrast in your design will really make it pop. And notice how they even, by the bright green with the black and then the white, right? It just, you notice those earbuds, the iPod, I mean, your eye's drawn to it. It's a really simple design, but it speaks volumes. She's moving. So again, and now let's look at some examples of good contrast and bad contrast. Okay, so on the left, those are all hard to read because they have poor contrast. Do you see how when we do light green on dark green, this kind of thing on light, white on yellow is horrible, really hard to read, gray on dark purple. But notice when we sharpen the contrast here by using either darker on lighter or lighter on darker, it makes the readability much easier. Bronze, Becky, I'm so glad to see you. And welcome people that are just logging in. Feel free to back channel chat, and if you haven't introduced yourself and you'd like to share where you're from today and the kind of work you do, that would be amazing. Yeah, from Australia. I'm so glad to see you, Bron. Okay, so here are examples of font on backgrounds. Let's look at the idea of using a watermark or a graphic in the background. Sometimes changing out opacity on your graphic elements can help improve the contrast. And so you can see this one up top, the readability is super hard because the opacity is not down enough. And here I can still put this watermark on, keep my brand, and I still have good contrast. Here's some more examples of good contrast versus bad contrast. So it doesn't matter if it's black and white or color. It's that idea that even here, see how this red is on top of green? It's like I can read it, but it's hard to read. And this blue on top of the dark green, it's not as clear as when I go over on the left side, right? So just really paying attention to your color palette and making sure that whatever you want to come to foreground really, really pops by really strong contrast. Okay, so that's contrast. Let's talk about alignment. In your designs, nothing should be placed on the page arbitrarily. And so every element should have a visual connection to some other element. And so whether it's horizontally aligned or vertically aligned, do you see how it just like the eye, it's your eye is following things. And so the alignment helps your eye understand like where to go. Size of font helps. There are a lot of things that help move your eye around a design. But you don't want to just have things randomly placed, and you don't want to mix your alignments normally. There are principles that violate that, but let's talk about alignment. So on the graphic on the left, there's no alignments. It's kind of like you have some left alignment, you have some right alignments, you have the lady here that's center aligned. I wouldn't say it's no alignment, I'd say it's just mixed alignments all over the place. Notice how when I stick with one alignment, if I go all left aligned or all right aligned, or which is this, or all centered, the design is so much more visually pleasing and easier for me to visually process. And so here are a couple more examples on alignment. See here, it's this business card, went all right alignment, that works great. It's all centered alignment works great. One of the places where we often see problems with mixed alignment, and this is because of how we were taught to write papers in English class, people will usually put a centered title up at the top, and then they'll move all their text to the left. And so we see a lot of documents being created that way, right? Where there's like a centered title and then all this left stuff. That's for writing papers. When you think about design and making things graphically flow, whether it's your PowerPoint presentations or whatever it is, think about going all centered, all left, or all right. And again, there are variations to that. And actually, even going back before I get into repetition, remember these posters? Look at the alignment on these posters. Both are full centered alignment. So do you notice how it's just easy for the eye to kind of move down the page because it's all centered? Okay. Here's our R, repetition. And this came out in Ingrid Vitel's work. So repeating any elements. Remember, getting away from scarcity, we're going to repeat the elements throughout the piece. So it helps strengthen the unity of the design. And you can repeat a lot of things. I mean, you see in these two examples here, you can repeat lines, you can repeat colors, you can repeat logos, shapes, textures, line thickness. It doesn't matter what you repeat, as long as you pick those key elements and repeat them through the design. Even if you look in how I've set up these slides, like this little font right here, that's repeated at the top of every of my major headings. I'm repeating these bullets. I'm repeating use of the dark gray font. I'm repeating the type of font just to create, you know, it's like, what slide am I on? Where am I in your presentation? Right? We're on the R part. We're on repetition. Here's another poster. What elements do you see here that are repeated? If you wouldn't mind just typing them in chat. Let's try to get all of them. I can see at least 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice the nice centered alignment on that too. The fonts are repeated. Yep, like these fonts up here. So even though they use different fonts, they repeated first name font, they repeated the second name font. The red hearts are repeated even though they're in different locations. The human forms are repeated. The colors repeated, the black and the red, and strong contrast too, right? Being on a white background. Yeah, and so this is a great poster that kind of represents all, you know, CRAP, contrast, alignment, repetition, and we're going to talk about proximity next. Here's an interesting way to think about repetition. Notice that the fonts repeated top and bottom. Actually, this is an example of horrible contrast. You see how you can barely read this guy's name down at the bottom? I mean, it's bad. Sometimes you want to gray out if you don't want attention drawn to that. but I'd probably use a lighter gray on that. I can't read it at all, so I don't know who that author is. But I did think this was interesting. By use of the photo in the background, and the photo has repeating elements, like this is the top world and you see the reflection in the water is repeating. So this feels balanced. The colors repeat, the type of font, the structure of the font. Notice they do an inverted pyramid. They just reverse it coming down. And so your eye kind of naturally flows to here and then kind of flows out here. When I move my cursor like this, do you guys see that? Okay, good. Moni, thank you for sharing. You just shared Moncito, a tool for checking contrast levels for accessibility compliance.
Yeah, just a comment.
Yeah.
In addition to, you know, your own visual description for contrast, there are standards that have been established for people on the web, particularly for those with disabilities, but frankly for everyone. And those standards it's basically based on ratios. So if you're not sure whether the contrast is sufficient on any graphic or image, you can go to tools like that one. That's one. There are plenty of others where you can compare the foreground text to the background text to see if it complies with the established web-based standards. And that's for people who have trouble discerning. That's beyond just like preferences in how you perceive things, but what the expectation is for all graphics and imagery on the web for those who have disabilities, and frankly for the world to be able to understand and read things better. So there are plenty of tools like that. That's one example. There are lots of others.
And a great example of that, Monty, is like people that are colorblind, right? And so we often sometimes will choose colors that we see a difference between the two colors, but if you're colorblind, they look the same. And so like words can actually disappear for people who are colorblind because there's not enough correct contrast.
And in fact, it goes a little bit beyond that, but sometimes it also has to do with the size of the text. So sometimes if it's small text on top of a background, it might be difficult to discern, but if you make it larger, it's fine. And that's why some of the online tools and other things, if you're not sure, can help guide you as to what passes the test for people looking at things online. And again, that's different from just pure design and more also to make sure it's compliant for those accessibility reasons.
Yeah, really good point. Thank you. These are just some more examples of repetition. I thought they were, I see so much in here. These three on the right are target ads, and this was just a graphic. Besides like multiple balls on this, what other elements of repetition do you see in the target ads? Notice how they keep their branding consistent. The color, the contrast is huge. The bright red on the bright white, right? Great contrast. The colors, the red and the white, the shapes, the small ball inside the larger circle. Notice they even repeated that larger circle on her up here. And then I thought this was interesting. You know, this was the little, what do you call this? Not cricket, croquet. The little croquet ball. Even repeated kind of the stripes on the little mallet. I had to think there. Design for joy, bright pops of color, repetition. Yep. Symmetry. And then even something like this, right, where there's just one little bird created by making multiples of it, it creates an interesting pattern in design. Okay, so there's repetition, and let's talk about the last principle, which is proximity. And so this is the idea that things that need to go together should be grouped closely together on the page when they're related, and if they're not related, please pull them apart and leave some white space. And that helps the eye see it differently. And so, for example, I thought this was a really nice graphic. I mean, here you have 4 rows of 4 dots each. It's 16 dots. But you notice just by over on this side, and I can't point to it. I got my chat screen up there. Sorry, let me go back. just by putting that row in between, it looks like now I have two columns and they're different for some reason. And so visually I'm perceiving. So please pay attention to your white space. And notice even on here, these bullets are a little together and you create a little white space, right? The heading's separate, so I just have a little white space there. White space is important to help us understand difference. And so here's one example of bad proximity and good proximity. This is a list of toys. And so just simple things like putting a heading and then leaving a space in between the column makes it so much easier for my eye to process what it is I'm looking at. And on the web, we know that people don't read full text from top to bottom, they scan. And so whatever your headings are, those are what people are going to use to do the quick scan and find the information that they need. So the headings become really important and the chunking becomes very important. So if you've got long lists like this, think about trying to break them out into chunks somehow to make scanning easier, to make processing easier. Here's another little before and after example of proximity. And so this was, and you can tell this one's a little more graphically designed. They brought in an actual clipped photo and they used a nice fancy font up here. But notice how they put the Bolshoi Ballet right underneath the name of the actual ballet that was happening, Swan Lake. These are related. These go together, right? Now we're going to leave this big space, put her in, and now here's all the narrative down here instead of being bumped up on this side altogether. And then we're going to take out the location, the times, the cost, and put that down here. Again, we're creating space. We're going to use different color font. And so just this chunking of elements that belong together and those that don't, and notice that they also made this with the exception of right aligning on that graphic, but in general, most of this graphic is left aligned. Just made it a little easier to go. Breeze. I thought these two logos were interesting to think about proximity. So even in logo design, or you know, maybe you're not creating a logo, but some teachers create brands for themselves. Or you have a title for your course or a title for the week, or you can use logo makers. You can do all kinds of fun stuff like that to brand the work. But think about the proximity, like on Adidas, I guess this is the outline of a shoe, which I never really thought about. They put it close to the logo. This is the actual, right? It's Adidas, it's a shoe. So we think that when we see that, we think of Adidas. Now imagine if I had pulled the pieces out and separated them. I wouldn't have the same immediate recognition. The same with FedEx. And I thought, why did they, I understand why they did the two colors. But why did they mush it together? Why isn't like Fed separate from X? Well, I actually typed it out. I mean, if you typed out X, it has a negative connotation in America anyway. Your X, it's not a positive thing. It's like your X this or your former that or your, I think by putting it together, it's almost like it's one word. We don't really think about it. It's FedEx. And there's an arrow between the E and the X right here, right in the white space, which is part of their brand. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, Cassie. I knew about that and I actually forgot. So just creative use of the white space. I'll give you two examples on the left. Good use of white space helps the eye focus. So nice use of white space on this web page. This is MailChimp. Main message, I mean, my eye knows where to go. Build your brand, sell more stuff. Man, was it sign up for free. So I know exactly what to do. If I want to build my brand, I sign up here. This was a flyer sent out recently. I'm part of the Immersive Learning Research Network. It's not a critique. But there was so much information on this page. Visually, it's hard to know where am I supposed to look first, right? Not a great use of white space. So it's hard. There's a lot to digest here without the white space. So this is and I kind of harp on the white space a lot because beginning designers feel like they have to put everything in. Like, oh, I can't forget that, or especially if you're building PowerPoint or multimedia stuff, because you don't want to forget to talk about something. and instead you can put your notes down in, you know, the comments section and kind of memorize a little bit, and save the key points and use lots of white space. Apple, who is the CEO of Apple? Dear Lord, my brain is not thinking today. Before he passed away. Thank you, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the master of developing presentations. If you want to know how to develop a killer presentation and talk, please watch Steve Jobs. The guy would often just have a visual, or he'd have one word on a slide. I mean, it was like, there was no doubt what the main message was. So he was an amazing developer of presentation content. I learned a lot from watching him. Okay, I'm going to wrap up the visual design principles by just talking a little bit about fonts. Because there are so many cool new fonts coming out and fancy fonts and just some real basics in fonts. You have two choices. You have serif fonts and sans serif. Sans means without. So serif are these little squiggles that you might see on fonts, like Times New Roman is a serif font. And then we've got the sans serif. Those are fonts like Arial with no squiggles at the end. When you're using serif fonts or fancy fonts, save those for titles or headings. Please don't put them in body text. They're really, they're okay in print. Like most books in the old days were printed in Times New Roman because in print it was visually easier to read, but on the web, sans serif fonts are easier for us to process. So think about sans serif for body text, serif for this. A few rules. Notice the infographics. See what happens when we put too many fancy fonts. We love them. They're so cute and creative. It was like when people first started building on the web, and you could do things like flashing graphics, and it was like, oh, let's do that. But we're learning sometimes from, like, think Google. Simple's best. Google's like one search box and a logo, you know, on the whole page. So real simple. So these basic principles, use 2 typefaces at a maximum. And then if you need variety, you can change it up by going bold, italics, maybe go from black to gray. You know, you can vary it that way, but try to stick with 2 main fonts as much as possible. And Google Docs does this well. Google Slides does this well. Most things where you're dealing with fonts and building content, you can set up your headings. And I would really encourage you to, you know, when you highlight something and tag it as heading 1, heading 2, instead of like, oh, I'm going to make all my headings, whatever, Arial 25. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to highlight each one and you know, change it to 25. No, mark it with your heading structure, like create this in advance. And so you stay consistent. And so it's letting me know, no matter where I am in the content, if I see this, I know that I'm at a major section. If I see this, I know that I'm at a subsection. And Monty, tagging the heading structure is super important for accessibility too. Do you want to say anything about that, Monty?
Sure. I think I've done a fair amount of work with people with disabilities in the accessibility world, particularly on the web and digital content. And probably the most important thing that every single person could do when they're making a document is to tag it with the right style. And that works in Word, PowerPoint, your email program, Google Docs, etc. And this is the exact same thing here. It not only helps from a formatting perspective for you as an editor, but behind the scenes, when you're tagging that content, it actually gets tagged with that heading structure. And so for those who are blind, for example, the computer tells them where all the heading level 1s are. And so they are able to navigate the entire document because of that structured markup. If that wasn't there and you just made all of the titles big and bold and 20-point font and whatever, yes, you visually can see that. But if you didn't tag it with the right styles behind the scenes, then when that document gets displayed to somebody with disabilities who needs some sort of assistive technology or other computer support program, it doesn't know to read any of that. So it just reads it all as if it were text. And so the right thing to do is really to always use the styles and then manipulate those styles to look how you want them to. So it works for both. You can make it big and bold and blue and blinking and centered, although you should follow Lisa's advice. But if you tag it correctly behind the scenes, that document will make sense to those people who rely on other tools to read and or consume the information.
And then Tanya makes a really good point in Word or Google Docs that it allows you to create a table of contents when you do that. And
frankly, if you've ever worked on a really long document, like a thesis or something else, like if you didn't use styles, it's a nightmare to go through and reformat the whole thing. If you did use styles, it's really fast and easy. And so it's a good habit for everyone to get into.
Okay, so in terms of just crap, I'm going to do, let me see, because I think that's, yeah. Before we move on, I just want to do a quick review. I'm going to take you back to the beginning. Now that you understand crap. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at this visually now with crap. Okay. Contrast. Does it have high contrast or low? It's high, right? Because it's white on the dark pink. If I would have used a light pink background, I wouldn't have the same high contrast. Okay, alignment. All centered alignment, right? Repetition. Repeated some of the elements with these shapes, with this font and with this font. And proximity. These things go together, right? Same course title. I'm covering it, so these are close, and that's kind of up there. And so if you start now, look at everything that you look at now, right? As you kind of go through, like even this. Contrast, is there contrast here? Yep, I've got the white on the dark. Is there alignment? Yep, it's all centered aligned. Is there repetition? Everything's a circle. I mean, even this little outer thing, I'm just repeating. I've repeated this font, right, on other slides. So, right, contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity, right? These things are all equal distance from one another. It lets me know that nothing's more important than anything else. But these are three main things that are going to be covered. So as you start to develop, just kind of, it's super easy to just go through your head, CARP, and did I address it? Is it high contrast? Is it centered or left aligned or whatever you're going to use, right? Okay, so that's CARP. I think we have time. Let me know if there's any questions or comments just about CARP itself. Can you guys see yourselves applying that to stuff that you may have built already? Hey, Machine, good to see you. Thanks for coming. Good, Amy. Great, Teresa. Okay, once you begin building content, you're going to need those free digital assets or copyright free. And so where do we get them? Some of my favorite places, absolutely, I'm on Pexlr all the time, pexels.com for free images and free photos. It's super easy to search. I mean, I just typed in the word education and videos. I got 31 videos and you see all these little keywords, universities, students, classrooms, learning. So whether you need some video footage or little images to use in backgrounds or examples, I love pexels.com. And if I'm on a tool and you have a free tool that I don't mention, please share it in chat. We'd love to have more free tools. Free sounds and music. Sometimes you get into making videos or multimedia presentations. Free sound has been around like 15 or 20 years of just sound clips. I mean, it can be anything from, I have assignments like, this might be a design assignment. If you're reading an Edgar Allan Poe book and it's build a scary scene from the book in a poster, right? Or layer in some music and make a multimedia poster and you need scary music, where would I go to get that? So I'm now it's not just visual, but I'm also hearing and taking in auditorially. And then zapsplat was a new one that I came across last night. It seemed a lot easier to search. And Audacity for editing your video. It's a free thank you for bringing that up because I didn't put that in my presentation. Ben sound, Adina. I'm not familiar with that one. Thank you for sharing. If you're working in 3D, if you're designing in 3D, if you're not, we could talk about that a little bit. Tiltbrush, and I'm going to talk about design tools in a second, is a great tool. But where do I get the things? I need a fish. I need a snowman. Where am I getting my little objects to build in 3D? Google Poly has hundreds of thousands of uploaded, not only objects. So if I searched for snowman there, I could download a 3D snowman model that I could bring in my 3D virtual environment, or I could go 3D print it on a printer. If I'm a kid building in 3D, I can upload to Google Poly, or I'm a student and share my designs with other people. If you're working in 3D at all, Google Poly is a really simple tool to use for finding and storing your own 3D assets. Google Slide and PowerPoint themes. Sometimes the themes that come with slides and PowerPoints, whatever you're using, Keynote and Apple, just aren't really meeting your needs. And there's lots of themes all over the internet that you can download for free. I mean, here's elementary geography lesson, right? So it might have the type of graphic elements that relate to your content specifically. It might give it more of a feel rather than starting from just a blank slate. There are free Google Chrome themes. You know, you could start really simple. If you're scared of design, change the background on your computer, right? I mean, this is from chromethemer.com, but this is also an extension in the Google Chrome store. This could be an activity for your kids. Hey, this week I want you to, you know, if you teach K-12 or maybe middle school on up, you know, change out the background to match your mood. I don't know, to match this week's theme in class, and share a screenshot with us. Help your students learn design skills too, right? Give them access, because when we create, we're at the highest order level of thinking, creating and building. So I don't care if it's something as simple as changing out your background or making a little movie, an iMovie. Use advanced search on Google and you can locate copyright-free images. I didn't know that, Braun. Is that like when you go into advanced search, there's a button to check, like give me copyright-free stuff? Oh, that's awesome. That's a really great tip. Thank you. Hey, Beatrix. Good to see you. And Tinkercad is a great tool for design. And I actually think I have that on my design toolkit piece coming up next. And Flickr. I didn't think about Flickr, Teresa. Thank you for photos. And you guys have already started mentioning content creation. So this isn't the assets themselves, but like, how do I actually design stuff now? Okay, Lisa, I understand PowerPoints, but what else do we have beside, you know, PowerPoint or Google Slides? No, I know it was hard. I talked about this 2 weeks ago. I love Canva. In case there's new people here that weren't here 2 weeks ago, I'm just going to bring it up again. Canva. And can you see my Canva screen now? Can you share with me in chat? Yes. Okay, good.
Yes.
Canva's really expanded itself. When it first came out, it was mostly to make your social media post. If you need an Instagram post or a Facebook post, they've really expanded their templates where you can build almost anything in here now. And a lot of it meets the CARP design principles. I mean, you can see even something like this little Easter sale thing, right? It's centered, there's repetition, there's maybe a little proximity issue or a contrast issue, but not horrible, right? So not everything's been vetted for CARP, but you don't have to start from scratch. You can start from these templates. You can change the text. It's as simple as typing, right? You can make your own logos. This is a great assignment for students. If they're building something, create a logo for it. Make a flyer for it. Hey, your team is doing blah, blah, blah. You're building a business, make a flyer for it, or make a poster for it. Or these are great for you if you're hosting a new class or a new session, or you want to advertise something to parents. or to other students. Maybe you're trying to get enrollments in your course at the college level. Creating a poster for your class and sending that poster around to people is really helpful. I shared this tip last week. Create an infographic. If your students are reading a book, have them pick the 5 to 7 top key things they learned from the text and turn it into an infographic and then share that with other people. Or you could build an infographic for your students, right? And so it's like all the designs are here and you just go in and edit. Do you want to edit the color? Do you want to edit the text? So I love this. Oh my gosh, they even have video footage now. Yeah, so Canva is a great, great, great tool for creating basic content. Resumes. Are you working with high school or college students that are learning to build resumes for the first time? Please help them get a visually scannable, pleasant resume, right? It doesn't just have to be a blank Word doc. Newsletters. Create a newsletter for your school, for your course. Have your students build a newsletter. Okay, that's enough about Canva. I just am a real proponent of Canva for beginner design, and I use it a ton. Image editing. If you don't have Photoshop, I've used Pixlr for years, pixlr.com. It's web-based. It's like Photoshop online, free. And so if you need to resize an image, or you've got a great image, but you want to put some text on top of it, or you need to lighten it or put a filter on it, I love working with Pixlr. If you're screen capturing, and there's a lot of screen capture tools, like let's say you're teaching people, or you're doing a tutorial on how to use something. Here's how to do this, and you want to record your screen like as a lesson. Once you install this, and it's like a super like 10-second install thing. From there on out, you just hit launch, and it just starts recording your screen. 3, 2, 1, and whatever's on your screen, whatever you tell it to record, you can draw the size of the square. Do you want it to include your face or just the screen? It'll capture that and save it as a video. And those videos can be shared with students. They can be uploaded on YouTube. If you want to create tutorials, this is how people create tutorials on YouTube. The how to work in Photoshop, how to build a game in GameStar mechanic, how to, right? It's all the how-to videos. So those are great to screencast in advance, put in your online lessons, and then you can let your students look at those on their own time. You don't have to demo stuff in real time always. I talked about 3D design earlier. Tiltbrush, I think, is if you're just getting into virtual reality, you have a VR headset. Google has 2 tools for building in 3D. Tiltbrush and Google Blocks. Tiltbrush is nice. It's a painting app, but again, I can import stuff here from Google Poly. So like this little elf guy got imported. We didn't build him. This was our the Jacobs Institute Christmas card. Each team member had to get in VR and add one thing to the scene. And so like I painted this Christmas tree. Another person put lights on it. We pulled these presents in, and everybody, even our dean, came in and dragged and dropped a present into the scene. And when you're building, and then we took a screenshot of it to make the Christmas card, right? But this is 3D. So when you're building, we were able to walk around the Christmas tree, drag the presents to the ground. The campfire had smoke coming off of it. And you feel like you're there in that scene. So designing in 3D can be amazing for students. If you have access, if they have access to those types of tools. Oh, and that's honestly, that's my introduction and overview. I did want to just quickly mention, and then we'll open it up for conversation. I have 2 more things coming up related to online learning. I'm doing a webinar in 2 weeks, Find Online Teaching Jobs, the higher ed edition. If you're interested in teaching adjunct in higher education, I wrote a book a couple years ago. I'm giving away free copies of the book at that session. But I'm going to give you all my teaching tips, how to find a job teaching online and higher ed. I've hired hundreds of online instructors, and there's just some basic things you can do to kind of secure the job for yourself. And then we're starting I'm doing a 6-week course on online teaching strategies starting in May. That is a fee based course, and the link is there if you're interested. And here's my contact information. And I'm really open to people reaching out. If you want to email me for any reason, have thoughts to share, questions, always open to that. Okay, so thoughts, questions, comments about design. And this was more visual design today and tools for design. We didn't really get into how to design an online course. That's like a whole nother, I could teach a whole class on that, and I have taught whole classes on that. I should probably do a webinar on that. That process has its own structures and rules and principles. I'm not seeing chat, sorry, let me get back to that. There we go. Okay, Beatrix. Oh, WeVideo. Thank you for mentioning WeVideo. I forgot to mention that. It is a great tool for video editing, and it's one of the only tools, if your district, if you're in K-12 and you're on Chromebooks, it's one of the only video editing tools that works in Chromebooks well. So definitely would recommend WeVideo. Thanks, Cassie. Thanks for coming, Laura, Teresa, Amy. Yeah, I encourage you guys, go back, just think about CARP. Take one thing that you have and redesign using CARP, you know, rebuild it in Canva. How do I make a watermark stay faded to the right transparency? I find in PowerPoint when I save, the image bounces back. Me personally, I would probably adjust the opacity in Pixlr, that online photo editing tool. I would just turn it down there, and then I would drag the new image back into PowerPoint. Thanks for coming, Mary. It was good to see you again, or for at least your name. I'm glad you're here. Good to see you, Tanya. Thank you, Diane. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, you're welcome. Stay safe and healthy, everybody. We're coming over the hump, right? We can make it come out better on the other side. Smarter humans, more focused on things that are really important, hopefully. Thank you. Monty, did you learn anything new?
I always learn new things from you.
I couldn't remember if you and I had went over CARP before.
We've talked about it, but having this is great. And I can't help but bring in that accessibility angle, because there's so much interesting overlap. And there's that whole like visual, like how it feels and looks, but also the, you know, making sure it works for everybody. And so I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that. It's been fun using Mighty lessons at work since you've been online. Which ones, Beatrix? The ones that you guys developed in the camp, or something else? Hey, Braun, I'm sure you knew everything that I covered today, but I'm so glad that you showed up. You've been teaching art online. Well, then, I mean, you know, you've been through all this, right? I mean, am I doing any PowerPoint design presentations? Not particular, not related to PowerPoint. I mean, I think everything I covered today, Linda, definitely, I mean, I built this in Google Docs, right? I tried to model it, so, but nothing more specific than what I did today. Beatrix, what tools are you using to actually facilitate the art process itself? I'm curious about that. Like, are you using Sketchpad? Google Forms. You upload pictures and videos all in one doc. You ask some questions. That's interesting. So you're using Google Forms as an instructional tool by putting all the videos there and then building questions around it and then asking them to upload pictures of their work. Huh. What are they using to create their work in? Is it hand-drawn and then screen capture? Are they doing digital art? Hand-drawn. Yeah, digital art can be tricky. I mean, I think Sketchpad is a great beginner tool. It's in Chromebook, it's web accessible, but if you don't have like a screen, a touch screen with a stylus, you know, your students are so limited as to how much they can actually do without the stylus. Yeah, and you're Title I, so probably don't have equipment. Yeah, it's like trying to, have you ever tried to sign your signature with the mouse online and it looks clunky and ugly? Having that a touch screen and a stylus to touch on the screen with is pretty mandatory for doing digital art. Or a touchpad, you know, some interface. Google Forms and Video and YouTube. How are you using YouTube? And lots of links, yeah. Oh, exactly. Right, you have to see it. Oh, thank you, Braun. And I will be sending out the recording and the direct link to the slides to everybody that signed up for today's session. So that'll go out after we're done. By the way, I'm going to stop recording if I haven't stopped already. Okay.